right format. Ron Beardon's going to continue with his presentation. I'm going to ask a little bit of change in format. I want you to ask or add your questions and comments to the chat. See if you can find the chat on the bottom of your screen for things that you can do. And when we get done, I would like to use the raise hand to work people through and get the comments and questions that will be live. But let's allow Ron to go all the way through the presentation before we do that. And I think it'll make it a quicker night for all of us. So Ron, I'm going to stop sharing the screen. If you'll pick up and
okay, Gary, since you mentioned something about the digital online application, one of the issues I always had with it was that different computers seem to produce different size fonts on the application. Is that been fixed yet, or is it on the agenda as a topic to be addressed?
That one has not been brought up to the web page or the online application committee yet. We'll have to bring those up. Right now, they're just in the seek and see if they can understand the coding portion, and they're fixing a couple of these that have been long-term concerns, if you will. So they're not going to be, their solutions are not coming right away. They're working their way through the code and making sure they can deal with it or determine whether or not they need to start all over.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen now.
Yes.
All right, says the host is disabled screen sharing.
Well, shame on me.
I'm still getting that message.
Yeah, I'm trying to find your name here to.
Okay.
Okay, see if you can play now.
Okay, I think I've got it now. See if I can bring it up. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this starts the second session. Last week we talked about some suggestions on how to cite records, and we talked about how to cite a marriage record on the back of the application, how to cite a census record, a birth record, a death record, and all those different things. And one of the things that I mentioned to everyone was that when you cite a record, try to always cite the younger generation first. So if John, for instance, is in generation 6 and he is listed in a parent's will or an estate record, that's where that will or estate record needs to be listed in 6, citing John first, such as John Smith, named as a son, heir, distributee, etc., whatever he's called, and the will could be a state record of his father, Robert Smith. So I think when we know that a birth certificate, if you've got John's birth certificate, John Smith, birth certificate of John Smith, listing parents as Peter Smith and Mary Jones. But when we get to wills, and I always did this for a long time, I would try to do them backwards and list the person whose will it was, and then name the children. Well, you're going in reverse chronological order. And to me, now that I kind of figured out the right words for this, you can do it like this. You're listing the younger member first, and the citation goes in the younger member's generation. John Smith named as a son or heir distributed in the will of his father, Robert Smith. Supporting documentation. I think all of you guys who have been around for a long time and done a lot of applications back through the years have received as a document a part of a piece of paper, just half a sheet or something like that. Well, those things are easily lost. And this genealogy committee policy right here, supporting documentation must be submitted on paper and should be printed on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper or an 8.5 by 14 white paper. Documentation must not be staple glued, taped, pinned, etc. All documentation must be legible for the information being introduced as evidence. So the preference of our staff is to receive the documents on an 11-inch length of paper. They don't mind a 14, and I can see where if you've got a will or a DAR paper and you don't have the means to reduce it, it might have to be on an 8.5 by 14 piece of white paper. Don't use colored paper. And if you have a document which is not normally a full piece of paper, some birth certificates, for instance, are not full pieces of paper, make sure you copy them onto a full sheet of paper where you're submitting an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper or a document, okay? This next thing, when I first became the registrar in Alabama many years ago, I stapled documents together that I thought should go together. Like if there was 2 pages of a census where, you know, the dad and the mom are listed at the bottom of page 1 and all the children are listed at the top of page 2, I would staple them together because I didn't want them to be separated. On wills, if I had a 5-page will, I'd staple all those things together. Well, it didn't take long for someone in the genealogy department to let me know, do not staple anything. And so none of this stuff should, using any of these methods, should be done. And paper clip it or alligator clip it. When you get all your documents together, then I clip either paper clip or alligator clip the application to the documents. And so, you know, they don't get separated. Documentation must be legible for the information being introduced. I still, as much as I go over this thing with our state folks here in Alabama, sometimes I still receive documents that are barely legible. They're too light or they're very dark and you can't read them. Well, you know, tombstones, if you can't read what's on the tombstone, you can't submit it. If you can't read the document, you can't submit it. If I can't read it, I can't approve of that and see that the connection has been made. So use the edit features, and I'll give an example or two here maybe in a minute. Use the edit features on your computer. If you bring up a census that's a little dark, and I had one of these I worked with this week already over the weekend. It was light and you could not read the names on it. So I downloaded it and I brought it up and brought up the edit features on my Windows computer and used the edit features to clarify the document and to darken the you know, the parts of it that were black, the lines and the ink and all that. And when I got through with it, it was a legible document. And that's what you have to do with these things. 2 book pages on 1 piece of paper. This is a pet peeve of mine here in Alabama. I don't like to see this because you can't read it. It's too small. And another thing that complicates it is it's got all that black margin around it, which uses a lot of ink. And if you're making a copy of it on a copier, it uses a lot of toner. But the main thing is too small. And so if I bring up a book like this online on Ancestry or whatever source I'm using, then I'll use the edit features and I'll reframe the document along the top edge, down the edge of the page, along the bottom, and then go right up the middle between the two pages, so that I've only got one page, and I cut off all the black margin, and then that one page is blown up to a full 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and it's legible. You can read it. And then if it's still a little light, and about half the documents I look at, I think, well, it's a little light. I can make that better. And so I'll go into the edit features then, and I'll just clarify it. It makes what the words on the page just kind of pop out at you. And then if I also need the right hand page, and then I'll do the right hand page too, and I save them as separate documents. And if there's 4 or 5 pages, I do each one like that. That way they're all large enough that you can read them. But if you get this, it's just really difficult to read. You have to have a magnifying glass to do it. So that's an inadequate way of doing that. So separate pages, just put one page on a piece of paper. Supporting documentation. So this is the narration of what I just showed you, I guess. Document should be downloaded, then edited to eliminate the black margin around the document, and edited so that only one page of the document is printed on the one piece of paper. When necessary, use the edit features on your computer to clarify, make the document lighter or darker as need may be. The result will be a document that is larger and easier to read than a document that is printed directly from a website. If you bring up a census page and you print it out directly from the website, it's going to have black margin around it. It's going to have all the wrong stuff associated with it. And if you download it up on the Windows computers, there's a feature up in the right corner where you can save your computer, and it downloads it. You can bring it up and do the edit stuff on it, and then you've got a really clean document. And this will satisfy the requirement that documents must be legible for the information being introduced as evidence. One book page on 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and this document then, and this is one that I think was the double page just a few minutes ago. It'll be large enough to read. Okay. All right, here's a census. This document needs to be clarified and the print darkened, and it's inadequate in its current stage. I'm not sure. Let me see if, no, I can't do that. Okay, so if I use the edit features, first thing I'm gonna do is edit all this black margin around, and this little part right here and right here, if you can see my cursor, they're gonna stay on it because I'm gonna come straight down the edge of the paper, and then I'm gonna go along the bottom of it, and I'm going right up and cut this left page off and back across top. And I'm gonna get a lot of that nonsense stuff off of there, okay? And then I'm gonna use the other edit features. And if you look, you can see that some of these names on this are very light, and they're really not legible. And so I'll use the edit features, and first thing I'll do is clarify and push that bar all the way to the right, and it makes the manuscript just pop out at you. And then I'll use the button to change the light and dark feature and move that button over, and it'll really intensify that ink on the page where the census taker wrote the names, and it makes it a legible document. Okay, this is that same piece of paper, clarified, and you can see all the names now would be legible. If it was a full piece of paper, of course, it's not showing up as 8.5 by 11 on your screen unless you have a very large screen, a computer screen. But you can see the difference in these two, how light this one is and how dark this one is, with all the black ink away from it. Okay. Okay, supporting documents. Do not list any information on the front of the application for which there's not a supporting document to prove that information. If you put a name on the front of the application, you need to have supporting document or documents. Sometimes it takes more than one to prove all the parts of that name if you're using first, middle, and last name. Now, if you've been doing genealogy for any length of time, you know, and you've looked at applications, you know that anybody back in time, whose first name was George, their middle name is automatically Washington. Well, that's what the family trees say, and that's what the people will put on applications. Their middle name is automatically Washington if their first name is George. Well, that's not true. We know it's not true. If their first name is Andrew, guess what? Their middle name is automatically Jackson. And I've seen that multiple times. No, that's not true either. So only use names that you can prove. If you can't prove a name, don't put it on the front. If all of his life the guy went by JC, then that's what needs to be on the front, because that's what your documents say. Okay, his obituary says JC. We had a guy in our chapter several years ago. He's deceased now, but he just had a middle initial. It didn't stand for anything, and they kept sending him dues cards that had a name in it. They just assumed there was a name. And he called me, he said, look, I want a dues card that reflects my correct name. I'm not going to pay my dues till I get one. And so we had to make an effort to try to get him a dues card that had the correct name. So make sure that anytime you're doing an SAR application that you do only what the documents show, and it's okay to use multiple documents if you have to, maybe even multiple censuses. One census has the guy listed as John, and the next 10 years, it's the same age person. He's between the same two kids. He's 10 years older, and maybe this has him listed as Everett. So now we've got, and then you got another census listed him as J.E. or John E. Well, now we've pretty much proved it's the same guy, and we got John Everett, and I think it's probably okay at that point to use it. You may want to look and see if there's any additional information. Dates, only put dates that you can prove. If you can't prove the day of the month, don't put the day of the month. Use the month and the year. If you can't prove the month, just put the year. Only use what you can prove. Sometimes you don't have a document that proves the place of birth for an individual, but you have them listed in the census and it gives a birth state. Well, then that's information, that's a document. You can, I worked on some applications this weekend where I underlined on a specific census record, the state beside their name where it says they were born. Now I have something to put on the application. Okay, citing a DAR SAR record copy to connect one generation to the next. Say you've ordered a record copy of a DAR paper, it could be an SAR paper, and down around generation 3, the applicant on that record copy and your new applicant have the common ancestor in generation 3. So starting in generation 3, you would list just DAR 876543 Patriot John Smith. And then they're going to look at that, and they don't want you to write or underline the things on the DAR paper in red ink, because I think people were actually using red ink to draw through the line, through the names and things like that. What I do, just to make it easier on the staff, I don't draw a line under the name on the record copy. I put it out beside the name and then put a number so they can just find it easier and quicker, okay? But don't underline names on a record copy. They haven't said anything to me about putting the line out beside it, so until they do, I'll probably keep doing that. Okay, if the DAR record copy is a supplemental application, you need to cite it as DAR 876543, add volume 755, Patriot John Smith. And this is important to put the add volume. Suppose you had a DAR, and we all know that we can use DAR papers 688702 or higher, as long as they're not red flagged on a specific thing which would prohibit us from using that paper. All right, so suppose your record copy is not 688702, it's 655702. And so you're thinking, I'm not sure. Well, could we actually use that paper? We could if it meets the modern proof standard and it does have the check marks and all that. Yes, we could still use it even though it's prior to 1985, but we also want to check to see if it's a supplemental application. So I just go to the DAR website and punch in that number, 655-702, in the member block, and then I can get a list of all that particular member's applications. And if that is the only one, then I'll know that's original application. It's not a supplemental. But then if there is a supplemental, I can get the ad volume from it and use that, and I'll write it in on the DAR paper before I submit it, so that when because the supplemental number, the ad volume number is not on an electronic copy. And that way, when the staff sees the DAR record copy and they say 655-702, ad volume 644, then they know that that paper was done after January 1st, 1985, and they don't have to stop and look it up. Okay. All right, citing a DAR or SAR record copy to prove service of a patriot. A couple of years ago, there was a change in the way the policy, so that we, many of us used to just, when we had a DAR paper and it had the service listed on it, we would just say DAR 876-543. That was it. Now we want to actually have it where we go back to the original proof of service. So the way you would cite it, and I've got some examples here using different service proofs. DAR 876-543, Patriot John Smith cites Revolutionary Pension Application S53467, because that's what's on the DAR paper on page 4, and that is the citation that proves his service. Maybe another one, 876-543, John Smith cites Virginia Revolutionary Public Claims, Abercrombie and Slayton, volume 2, page 10. An SAR example, 222333, Patriot John Smith cites South Carolina Stub Entries to Indents, book RT, page 27. Of course, when we're talking about stub indents, we could actually use the audited accounts there too, and put down, what particular the information on the audited accounts. Another DAR example, DAR 876-543, Patriot John Smith cites jury list of South Carolina, Hendricks and Lindsay, page 34. So they do want you to use that, and that way there is a primary citation for the service on all of our SAR papers, even if it comes from a DAR paper. Okay. All right. Required signatures. For regular or junior applications, and to some extent memorials, but I'll do it separately here in a second. For regular junior applications, the signature of the applicant, the signature of the sponsor, the signature of the co-sponsor, the signature of the state registrar, and the signature of the state secretary. Those 5 signatures are required on a regular or junior application. If the junior member is too young to sign, then an adult family member, at the top again, can sign for the applicant if the junior applicant is too young, followed by the signature of the adult family member. An example, John Smith, it would be the child by father, Peter Smith. And that way we know who actually signed it. Okay. Now, one thing came out 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5, I don't remember exactly. We had a grandfather who was a member who decided it was time for his grandson to be an SAR member. So he filled out a junior application on his grandson. He signed it for the grandson, sent it in, it got approved. Well, the postcard acknowledging the acceptance of the application went to the parents' home because their address was listed on it, since the child lived at that address. And the parents saw it and said, well, what is this? And so they called the grandfather and said, oh, yeah, I sponsored him. I want my grandson an SAR. Well, the problem was he's not the parent or the legal guardian of the child. The parents are. And they didn't want the child in the SAR. For whatever reason, they did not want the parent of the child in SAR. And so we got a directive then from SAR that said only parents or legal guardians should sign junior applications. And I still go by that. Okay. Now, the fact is, you're not going to see who signs it. We have to take some of this stuff on faith, but nonetheless, that's what we're supposed to do, is only the parent or legal guardian should sign an application for a minor child. For supplemental applications, only 2 signatures in your state are required. The signature of the applicant and the signature of the state registrar. That's it. No sponsor, no co-sponsor, no state secretary on supplementals. Okay?
Cool.
All right. Memorial applications. Similar to the junior application in that the signature of the adult family member for the deceased applicant, followed by the signature of the adult family member, i.e. John Smith will be the deceased person by Peter Smith. Okay. Peter Smith is usually, he's going to be an SAR member. He's going to be a family member who's sponsoring in a brother, a nephew, a son, a father, an uncle, someone who's closely related to him. Signature of the sponsor, usually the SAR member who is the family member. So Peter Smith might sign up there for the applicant. He probably will also sign as the first line sponsor. And then the signature of the co-sponsor, state registrar, and state secretary. Once again, 5 signatures, okay? Checking for errors. Develop a system for checking the SAR application for errors. Proofread. Now, this is what I do, and I'm going to suggest this to you because for me, it works. Everybody's different, and everybody may have their own system. When I proofread an application, I do it vertically. The application is set up in 3 columns. Now, the digital application may be a little different, but most of the other forms are set up in basically three columns: name column, the date column, and the place column. And so I'll look down the name column. If you've got surnames repeated from generation to generation, even if they change somewhere down through there, you've probably got them more than once. And you can catch a spelling error a lot quicker if you do it vertically. If you're doing, trying to proofread by generation, all the way across generation 1 and come back and all the way across generation 2, you're mixing names, dates, and places in your mind all at the same time. Whereas if you're just doing down the column, name column, you're going to catch spelling errors a lot easier. The date column, one of the most common errors with dates, if we do all the slashes, is that we've got a single digit date and somebody forgot to put a 0 in front of it. Well, if you check that vertically, they will pop out at you. It does me. And so I check the date column vertically. Place column, same thing. Check to make sure you've got 2 slashes in every place. It's either city/county/state or /county/state, or it could be city/state or simply /state. It's got to be one of those. And so you'll catch errors in that a lot easier if you have a system, and I suggest that you try just to proofread vertically down the application. It seems to work for me real well. Checking for errors again on the back of the application. Check for the correct generations that you have all your information listed in. When I have all my documents, and I did an application this weekend, and I did all the genealogy and just roughed in all the names, and then I did not put any dates or places initially. And so then I started looking for all of my documents and got all the documents that I could find. And I went through each one with a printout of that rough draft just for the names, and labeled all my documents, underlined them, and used the numbers for the generations, and then separated them in stacks per generation, and then put them in the right sequence. For instance, I don't think you ought to have a census record before a birth record. You need to have the birth record first because that's the first thing that happened. A birth record should come before a marriage record or a death record. And I've seen applications, I used to, not as much anymore, where someone will use a death record, then a birth record, then the marriage record. Well, they're out of sequence to me. So I try to make sure that I've got my stack of documents for each generation in the right sequence And then I just go through them and list them all on the back of the application, but make sure you're in the correct generation. Check dates for the correct decade and century. This is an easy mistake to make. Even on the front of the application, when you're checking vertically, you can see pretty quickly if you've got a wrong century listed or even a wrong decade, like for a census page on the back. You can see that pretty easily. So just check it and make sure that, and check your documents against what you actually typed to make sure you have the right decade in a census page and all that, and you got correct dates. Check census to make sure you listed the correct year. I just said that. Make sure documents have generations numbered in red ink and in the correct order. Make sure they're in the correct order. Make sure all required signatures are on the application. These are just things that if we check, and it's like Gary was saying a little earlier when he first started, he thanked everybody for starting to submit a lot cleaner applications. This is part of it. If we check for these things, sometimes I check an application 3 or 4 times for errors. Then I'll say, well, it's ready to print. So I'll print it out. And as soon as it comes off the printer, I'll look and there's another error. And it just burns me up. I'll say, oh, here we go again. So I'll fix it, double check it again for errors, and then I'll print it out, hopefully without errors the next time. Submitting the application. Each state society should have a systematic way of submitting applications. If you do not have a consistent system for handling applications, you need to develop one, okay? When I first became a registrar in Alabama over 18 years ago, we did not have a systematic way of doing things. There were a lot of things back in those days that were kind of out of kilter, out of sync. I had applications being submitted to me on DAR paper. It was unbelievable. And so we don't have a lot of that problem anymore. Our chapter registrars, we have a good team of chapter registrars, and they work hard to get all of these things right. If there is a little problem on an application, I usually, when I get through, sometimes it's enough that I think, this one's going to get kicked back by the genealogy staff, so we're just going to have them fix it before I submit it. And so I'll say, you need to fix this, and they'll get the signatures again, send it to me, and I'll match it back up with the docs, and it's on its way. But anyway, let's have a consistent way of doing things. I'm going to show you what we use in Alabama. And if you want to take a picture of this screen, I suggest you do that. This system works for us, and consistently over the last 18 years, I've been the registrar. We've been through a lot of different state secretaries. A lot of them serve 2, 3, maybe 4 years, and they move on to move up the ladder or whatever. We have had a lot of different state treasurers. They're involved with this process. And so we have a system. So I review the applications and prepare them to be mailed to the state secretary. I email them, and I did this today. I mailed 3 applications to the state secretary. So as soon as I got the envelope ready, I came in, and I keep a file copy of everything. So I emailed the secretary, the treasurer, and CC the state president to let him know that apps are in the mail. This email is a breakdown, which includes chapters. So I have the person's name on the application, regular application or supplemental or junior or whatever, then the chapter name, and then the NSSAR amount and the ALSAR amount. And there's a breakdown laterally for each name all the way across. At the end of the email, after I listed all the applications, I specifically tell the treasurer how many checks to write and for what amounts. Now, we know that supplementals cannot be on the same check with regular applications. Regulars, juniors, and regulars, juniors, and memorials can be on the same check. Supplementals have to be different. They go a different way, okay, when it gets to national. So I'll let the treasurer know how many checks to write and for what amounts to send to the secretary. So usually the day I put these things in the mail to the secretary, the treasurer is putting a check in the mail. And then the treasurer prepares and mails the requested checks to the secretary. notifies me and the secretary that the email, by email, the checks have been mailed. When the secretary receives the applications and checks, he gleans off the checks, gleans the checks off the applications which were submitted by the applicants, and either deposits checks or sends them to the treasurer. And in the meantime, the treasurer's check is on its way. And so the secretary prepares a supplemental form and lists all the applications and mails the applications and the check that the treasurer, checks that the treasurer sent on to National. And I know a lot of states are different. Some states where the registrar prepares the the transmittals. Everybody has their own system. It's whatever works for you is okay. There's not a specific guideline for that process, and everybody does it differently. So whatever works is good, but make sure you have a regular system down. And actually, this system here that I've just outlined was something that we developed, the officers that were serving at various times. And then, usually after about the second or third year I was a registrar, we kind of started developing this. And then we started, doing the email stuff and all that. So now it's a pretty good process, that we've got in place. And if the second, and then we've never lost an application in the mail. Sometimes they've gotten delayed, but we all know that this stuff is in the mail coming to one another. And if it doesn't arrive in a week, we start to get a little concerned, so we kind of go from there. Training for local application preparers. Well, we have chapter registrars who prepare applications. We have other SAR members which sometimes prepare applications. I know in one chapter we have here in Alabama where there are 3 or 4 former chapter registrars, still members of the chapter. If the registrar were to get overloaded, then these other guys can do an application. And the registrar might funnel one to one of these other people who is experienced and knows how to do this and say, hey, can you do this one for me and lighten my load? And then we also have DAR volunteers. Now, the thing about DAR members is they have to learn to do it the SAR way. If you turn a DAR member loose on an SAR application, the first draft you're going to get it's going to look like a DAR application because they do things a little different than we do, and that's understandable. We don't all understand the way they do things, and they don't understand the way we do things, but they are slightly different. So I've got some DAR members here in Alabama who do SAR applications. I even had one that served for several years, basically as a chapter registrar, because I didn't have a member in that chapter that was willing to do applications. So I trained the DAR member to do them the SAR way. Date formats and place formats are one of the things that are different, especially. So how do we do this? Well, we have, I do a workshop every year at our state convention, usually an hour and a half to 2 hours long. And we go over all the things that have come out in the last year, all the new stuff. In this past year, a lot of things, since a year ago, a lot of things have changed with SAR applications, the way we do them and things that are required of us to do with these applications. So we do that. Well, as I have chapter registrars at all different levels. I've got one that I'm just starting to train right now. I've not even got the first draft from him. And so it'll be kind of touch and go there. He'll submit a draft to me and we'll look at that. And then I'll say, okay, we need to fix this, we need to fix that. And we'll do just the front of the application. And I'll say, now, let me give you a few pointers on doing the back of the application, and I'll show him a few things and then turn him loose on that. When he gets that done, he'll submit me another draft. And so we have one-on-one training, a lot of one-on-one training with new chapter registrars, new SAR members who want to learn to do these things, and DAR volunteers. A lot of times, I had this happen actually this year. I had an applicant say, I told him the process. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to get these basic documents from you. When I get this stuff from you, then I'm going to send it to the chapter registrar and they'll prepare your application. He said, well, I want to prepare my own application. I said, no, we don't usually let new applicants prepare their own application. And he said, well, why not? I said, well, have you read the application preparation guide? And of course, his answer was no. I said, have you read the genealogy policy manual of the SAR? Well, no. I said, that's why we're going to do your application for you. Now, once you become a member and you want to learn how to do these, use yours as a guide because it's going to be done right. And then call me and I will show you some tricks about if you want to start doing supplementals, and you can do your own supplementals, but I do want you to run them through the chapter registrar. And so they do that. So we got a lot of guys that do their own supplementals now, they just run them through the chapter registrar. Or if it's somebody, I work with a guy this weekend who actually has a lot of experience doing applications, but he was still going to run it through the chapter registrar. And it's one that I sent back to him because I didn't feel like he had done it correctly. I sent it back to him last week. I said, it's just got to be redone. And so he did. He sent me the draft. We went through it together. Everything was right. And I said, talk with your registrar. Tell him you've talked to me. I'm okay if you want to send it directly to me. If he still would like to go over it, give him the option to do that. So that's what he did. And haven't heard from him. So I'm assuming by now it's in the mail. Okay, in Alabama, we also have a fees and dues chart. This is for new applications. I developed this within the first year because we have a lot of different categories of applications. And let me try something. I'm gonna back out where I can enlarge this a little bit. I think you can still see this, right? Everybody can see it? Okay, all right. So, I can grab, something just happened. Okay, so I can grab the scroll bar, push it up a little bit. I'm going too high. Okay, this is where I want to be. So this is an Excel file, is all it is. And I've got a few colors in it to kind of make it easy to see if it's on your tabletop or your work area. Alabama Society, Sons of the American Revolution, national and state fees and for new applications and supplementals. And I put an effective date on it. Okay. And so if there's a change, now this effective date is a result of a change that was made at the national level in 2021. And so the effective date that I did this was on July the 16th, 2021. And so once I get this done, I send it out to my distribution list of Alabama people that need it. And I also send it to our webmaster, Mr. Jim Maples up in Huntsville. And he puts it on the state, he takes the other one down and puts the new one on the state website. So it's there. It's easy for me to send out to anybody that needs one. So I've got all the different categories. So the first one, new member regular application, 25 and older. And I've got how much it costs total out there. New member regular application, a family plan, because we give for a discount. And it shows the amounts, the proper amounts for that and what it adds up to. In Alabama, we have a special, I don't know if all the states do this. We have a category from 18 to under 25. You're an adult member, but you're under 25. So if you're 18 through 24, not yet 25, you get a special break in that you don't have the $20 Alabama fee on there. It's waived. And so there's all kinds of different categories. There's a couple for junior members, one with an established lineage, one with a new lineage. There's youth. Now, some of you guys have been relatively new. We used to have a program, and it started back about 1998, thereabouts. It predates the junior membership program. It was called Youth Registrant because you still had to be 18 or older to be a member. Youth registrants where fathers or grandfathers or whatever, they would do applications on their sons or grandsons or nephews who were under 18 and only required one signature, usually the person who did the application. And then those papers were held in escrow at national until that person turned 18, and then they could convert to regular membership. Well, Then a couple of years later, they came out with the junior program, and we had both the youth and the junior program for about 3 years or so until the youth program was phased out completely. However, you need to be aware that we still have youth registrant papers in the files at national headquarters. And a lot of those kids that came in at birth are still eligible with that paper. They don't have to fill out a new paper. They're eligible with that paper to convert to either a junior membership or a regular adult membership, depending on their age. You have to do it before your 29th birthday. And that's strictly just with youth registrants. Youth registrants were never members. They could convert to regular member or junior member I just generally wrote a letter, sent it through the state secretary where he'd be aware. If I had a copy of the junior application, I sent a copy of that. Then at national, they will assign them a new national number. Junior members have their own set of numbers, national and state numbers. When I did my sons, I was trying to be the first one and I missed it by one. Kid in Delaware was the first one. I think Roland Downing's grandson may have been national number 1. My son was national number 2, but state number 1. And then I converted him to regular membership upon his 18th birthday. And so it goes on down. It talks about CAR transfers, the letter of good standing, supplemental applications, reinstatements. If you want to reinstate a membership, that's the state and national stuff, does not include the chapter because all the chapters are different. Transferring in, somebody had a question about that earlier. It's $10 to transfer into Alabama. We waive that if the transferee provides us with an original, a copy of his original application, his record copy. If he provides the original record copy, then we waive the $10. The $10 is basically to buy the record copy, so we have a copy in Alabama. It talks about life membership. Fees are not assessed new applicants under age of 25, And so it's got information on there. And then anytime there's a change in this at the state or national level, because chapter stuff is not on here, anything state or national, I go in the Excel file, the original, and edit the costs. And I've got this where it automatically adds across each row, or each row, I guess you call it, across this thing. And so if 40 and 35, it'll automatically add up to 75 the way I've got it configured and all that. So, and some of these things are not NA or waived, not applicable or waived. All right, going ahead, let me go back to this. And I'm going to go back to from current slide. It's thinking. All right, let me see if I can go to the next one while it's thinking. Oh, there it goes. Okay, pending applications. I think that's the next one. Uh-oh, I don't know where that came from.
Gary, I think he just got kicked out.
I think you're right. We'll just wait patiently. I appreciate everybody adding to the chat as we're going. We'll go back through the chat questions when he's finished. But just for yours, Chris, I am not sure. Is there a list of any outstanding youth applications? We'll have to ask and see if the genealogy staff has it in stacks. I'm not sure. Mike Scroggins, if you're on still, do you know if there's a list of outstanding youth applications that are still valid?
I know the Maryland Society had quite a few, but I don't know if there's still any out there.
Okay, we're having a little discussion. We're just holding on for you. Okay, thanks. Say that again, Chris.
The Maryland Society had several, but I don't know whether there is, I can make some phone calls to see if we had any others, but it's kind of hit or miss.
Do you remember the year that the youth registrant was removed? It seemed like it's
And
2009.
it was removed in around 2000 or so when Roland Downing came in, and he was the one that went and switched to junior membership.
Okay, but there's something after 2007 that said we're no longer doing youth registrants, but I don't know the year.
But Roland was the one that switched the program.
Well, Ron is trying to get back on. I think he has a service provider that's not helping him at the moment. Court Dwyer, you started off the chat early on. Do you want to ask your question for the group and we can see if we can work this out?
Yeah, sure. Be happy to. I did not send it out to everybody, so not everybody saw it. I only sent it to Gary, I believe.
Okay.
Basically, I'm struggling trying to resolve two opposing things about an application. One of them is we've been told that the application is not a family history. It's proofs through the bloodline to the patriot that the applicant deserves to join. On the other hand, I just had two applications pended saying that I didn't put non-bloodline people who are on the proofs somewhere on the application. And the only thing I can find on the proofs is their names. What good does it do us to put these people who are not in the bloodline on the application when it's not supposed to be a family history? I can't make those two play together.
Okay. The family history concept is putting data in there that you have no proof for. That's what I'm saying. Family history is, we know it. I know in my family, I know my mother's birthday. I know all the wonderful things that go with that, but I don't have a birth certificate for. I don't need it, but I don't have it because I'm going through my father's line, so I don't need her birth certificate. What we're running into is people putting data in that they have no documentation for. If you have the documentation and you show it on the paperwork that you submit, you can add that data into the application. But what's happening is we're spending a lot of time at the staff looking through the data that's there and then trying to go back and say, well, these weren't added, these weren't checked off yet. I need to go back and make sure I haven't caught them. So the staff is having to go through the applications twice just to make sure that they didn't miss something. So
yeah, I understand that side of it.
Okay.
And I understand the other side of it too. I just think it's a waste of time and effort to put people on the application front that are not in the bloodline.
Okay,
There's more people to look at. There's more proofs to go look at and red underline and show generations on. It just seems an immense waste of time to do that. And as I say, I sent in 2 applications and I did them just straight bloodline. And of course, have a a generation 2 that that generation's birth certificate shows generation 3 mother and father. The bloodline went through the father. I left the mother off. Now they're telling me I have to put the mother on simply because she's listed on the son's birth certificate. And what I'm saying is that's a waste of time.
okay.
It's a waste of effort. And I'd love to see the committee tackle that and try and straighten that out.
Okay, we'll address that later. Okay, I
Okay.
think Ron has come back among the living here. So if Ron, you want to pick back up, you're muted at the moment. So
Ron, you're muted.
Okay, Gary, I'm not able to share my screen.
well, that'll be darn. Okay, just a second. Okay, I think you're up now.
Okay, I am, thanks. Okay. All right, I think this is where we were. Back one, pending applications. Do not, and let me, yep, okay. Do not let pending applications remain pending with no corrective action taken. I look on the pending website and I don't want to pick on anybody. That's not what the purpose of this is. And I see states with 5 pending applications, 10, 15, 25, 40. And I don't understand that. When I get excuse me, when I get a pending application, I get on it as quickly as I can and determine what it's got to have to get it fixed. Occasionally, we determine that we can't fix it. Maybe there's a guy named John Brown and someplace in North Carolina who we're claiming was a patriot, and we've got a some kind of pension record, or we got a muster roll or something, and only to find out because the genealogists at National have a little bit better access than some of us do on some of this stuff, but they determined there's 4 guys in the same county by the same name. Well, there's no way we're ever going to be able to separate 4 guys, you know. So generally, when that happens, we look for an alternate patriot. We just we do a completely new application and submit it as a replacement to clear up the pending application. And I get pending applications too, just like everybody else. I just don't let them sit there, you know, any longer than I have to. We did have a pending application back in February, mid-February. So when I went up for leadership over that last weekend in February, I discussed it with the reviewing genealogist to get his take on it. In 18 years, I've never argued with a reviewing genealogist over genealogy or service, because sometimes applications come to me and I have questions about them, or I'm not sure about certain things. Well, they do too. And it's my job as a state registrar to satisfy their questions about that application. And so the reviewing genealogist said, you know, my concern is this fellow was not named in his father's will, and his father was the patriot. And so why was he not left, why was he left out of his father's will? And actually there were about half the kids left out of the will, and, you know, won't go into all of that, but so it was my job to try to prove to him that this man was a son of the patriot. And he said, you know, all I really need on this is a nudge, just a little bit would probably put it over, just one little bit of evidence at all. And so I said, okay, then that's what we'll go for. And I said, I think we can do it. So went back through, we submitted 3 different books that claimed that relationship. The problem was and I knew it was weak when I sent it in, it's all we had at the time. All 3 books were 1 generation away from the authors having personal knowledge of that relationship. Just 1 generation, you know, and my contention with the reviewing genealogist was yes, but this author did know the cousins and they knew each other, you know. So he said, that's the reason I only need a nudge, because I understand some of these relationships. So I got on the phone, I finally got caught up enough that I got in touch with the applicant. And on the phone, we went through and tried to find legitimate documents, and we found some things, and we compared census records, and every time we could find any little thing that we thought would contribute, we would make note of it. And so I called the reviewing genealogist then the next week. It was over a weekend. I called him the next week, and I was going through all this stuff, and he says, that's all I need. I said, but wait a minute, I'm not through yet. I think you need more than this. He said, no, I've already accepted this other part that you're about to tell me now. And so anyway, it got approved. So, but if you let pending applications remain pending, they just pile up. That's the reason some states have 20 and 30 pending applications. And so we need to get on those, you know, attack them immediately, go after them immediately. If you can prove it, and sometimes it takes me a couple of months to prove it, putting together a proof argument. Sometimes I realize right up front that I can never prove it. And I tell the applicant, we can never prove this one. We're going to go back and try to find a different patriot. And that's the approach we take. But we don't want to leave these applications sitting there just to age out 5 years from now. Okay. So we need to go after them. Get others involved if you need help. Yeah, most of you have a state genealogist. We do here in Alabama, and he's an excellent genealogist. You know, if I got stuck on something, and I'd call him and say, look, I'm stuck on this. I need your help. He's a good researcher. Other chapter registrars or other state registrars. There are guys on this program tonight that I know their reputations as genealogists, and they've been around doing this for decades, and they would be glad to help someone who needs a little help from another state. I would not be a bit afraid to, if I had something in Maryland, to email Christopher Smithson and say, hey, I need some help. And I know he would help me. And he would do, he would ask for help too. And I'm just citing him because I first met him, he probably doesn't remember this, at the 2005 Congress. And I was impressed then with what I knew about him, and I still am today. And there are others too. We got a lot of guys, Dennis Van Warmer and John Sinks, and there's a whole lot of guys on here, former GGs who are on here tonight and everything else. They'll be glad to help if we need help. Genealogy committee members who have advanced knowledge. That's what I was just talking about. Individuals associated with genealogical societies. I've had a couple instances where I've had to contact genealogical societies in specific places to see if they had any information in files about certain families. And I contacted, I was looking for the patriot was German descent, and of course, if you've ever done anything with German patriots, you know that you can spell their names about a half a dozen different ways as they were trying to Americanize their German names, and they spelled them a lot of different ways. So contacted this clerk in Wythe County, Virginia, and I told him what I was looking for. I saw in a book where this patriot had given a lot of the land to his sons, and I wanted copies of the deeds to see what they said. And so he tried to look them up and said, he called me back, said, I can't find them. They're just not here. I said, okay. Well, before that, I'd actually called somebody at the Genealogical Society up there, and they had not called me back. That's the reason I called the clerk. But anyway, so the Genealogy Society person called me back and said, so what can I help you with? And I told her what I was looking for. And I said, but I talked to the clerk. Clerk said it didn't exist. She said, oh, I'll go in tomorrow and I'll find it. And I said, well, the clerk said it didn't exist. And he looked and she said, well, he's young and inexperienced. I'll find it for you tomorrow. And, so the next day she called me back and she had found it. Sure enough, she found exactly what I needed. So probate clerks, if you need a probate record, not every probate record is online. No, just not. Most of them are, but we've got a few that aren't. And I've had to, call probate clerks before. Sometimes you get one that's willing to help you and email you the documents. Say, just send me a check for $2. And so we'll do that. And sometimes you get one that's been there about 40 years and they don't want to be bothered, and they'll just tell you they don't want to be bothered, but it doesn't hurt to ask. Librarians in specific places of interest. When my son was about 15, and he's 35, this has been 20 years ago. I got him out of school for 3 days. Principal excused him because we were going to be doing research in the South Carolina room of the Greenville County Library. And the principal was real good about this. He said, he's going to learn more up there with you for those days than he would be here in school with me. So I'm excusing him from school. So he did. So we took off and went up there and did research for about 2 or 3 days in the Greenville County Library and kind of got to know the genealogy librarian. Now, she's not just a librarian, she's a genealogist librarian. And I've called her probably 3 or 4 times in the last 20 years and say, and still, she's still there. And I'll say, I'm having trouble with this. Can you help me? Yes, she always does. Sometimes it's the next day, sometimes it's 2 weeks later. They will call you back. If you get a genealogist librarian, they will call you back and help you all they can. So don't be afraid to call on them, okay? All right, direct contact with staff genealogist. Boy, this is a big no-no, and this comes up in every conversation. Only the state registrar should have direct contact with the staff genealogist. Only the state registrar, okay? Not the state genealogist, not the chapter registrars, not the applicants, not the DAR lady, nobody, because you count all the state societies and the international societies, there are about 55 of us. And we got what, 7 genealogists, Gary?
8.
8, okay, 8. 8 into 50, if they all got an even number, that's 8 calls a week that they could possibly get maybe from us if we all call once a week, a little over 8. And, that distracts them from their job at hand. And as I've told you, I mentioned before, I never have argued with staff genealogists. I may want to get their take. If I get a pending application, first thing I do is pick up the phone and call them. Say, okay, tell me what your take is. In your view, what do we need to do? And they will make some suggestions, which I usually try to follow. Or if I've already done that, I'll tell them I've done that, and they, we talk about a course of action to be taken. But if an applicant calls them, they can tend to get a little hostile. We don't need anyone calling our staff genealogist except state registrars. And through the years, I've developed a really good working relationship with them. So that's one of the things that we must always observe. Oops. Okay, I think that's the end of the presentation, Gary.
Okay, well, thank you. One point of clarification for that. Normally it's a state registrar, but there are some state societies who have a different state point of contact. But only the state point of contact is the one, just as Ron was saying. So there are some state societies,
Okay.
The point of contact is the genealogist. Others have the point of contact is the state secretary.
Yeah, point taken. I am the state contact in Alabama, so I'm
Right.
both things.
Right.
So-
And when I say that, I want to say genealogy point of contact, because if you're a chapter or state secretary, you probably are the point of contact for John Toon for secretarial duties. And if you're the membership point of contact, you have another list. So there are several state points of contact, but what we're discussing is genealogy state point of contact. So Ron is correct. Let's limit the contacts coming down. Okay, Dave Jones, you had a couple of comments early on. Documents are hard to read. Can we transcribe them? Ron, how do you use a document that is printed but it's difficult to read? Do you transcribe and add both, or how do you do it?
I've never had one I've had to transcribe because once again, those edit features on my computer make it legible, and there's a couple times that I've had chapter registrars ask me that question. I said, why don't we just pick a document and then let me show you how we edit it. And then, and so that they learn to do the same thing. So transcriptions, certain transcriptions we accept as a transcription. For instance, the South Carolina Archives website has transcriptions of the old South Carolina wills. And our staff will accept that. Those transcriptions were all done by the WPA, which is a government entity, and they will accept that, okay? A transcription, a lot of times we have to have transcriptions of papers, wills, et cetera, that are in a foreign language, Spanish, German, French, especially. I've handled a few of those, and we have to write a short note or a letter explaining the qualifications of the translator in a case like that. Now, if you submit a manuscript document and it's not real clear as far as what it says, and you can find a typed transcription of it, submit both, and the staff will look at the transcription and compare it with certain words in the manuscript to see that the transcription is accurate. And that's generally acceptable too, okay? As an individual, if you do the transcription, as long as you send the original manuscript and we can kind of determine that your transcription is goes right along with the original, then yeah, that's fine. But individuals generally, transcriptions done by individuals who are not known or have no reputation for doing transcriptions like the WPA or anything, those kind of transcriptions by themselves are generally not accepted.
Okay. Dave Robeson made a comment that if we can't find it in one place, we might look at family search or ancestry or swap them out for looking at the documents and the ones that you are able to doctor. Some of us aren't that sophisticated in editing, so maybe going to another location would help.
Yeah, and I do that all the time. I have certain things that I start on Family Search, and I have certain things that I start on Ancestry.com. When I have an applicant who is inquiring about membership. Most of those applicants, probably 99% of them, know they have a patriot ancestor, or at least have high suspicions that they do, and they know who that person is. And so I give them a little just question. I call all these people personally, try to make contact with them on the phone, and ask them some questions leading into a conversation, and ask them, what do you know about this patriot? Or when there's 5 guys by this name, can you tell me some information where I'll know which one of the 5 it is? And usually they know, when he was born or died or where. That helps me. And then the first thing I do is look on the DAR website to see if I can find a suitable record copy, an acceptable record copy that will help us in the application process, because that's just the quickest, easiest way to do an application. Okay. There's no point in doing wills and state records and birth and death records and all that kind of stuff that you got to look for the last 4 generations if it's already been proven. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. So we use those DAR papers. And honestly, I use DAR papers. If I have a choice of an SAR paper or a DAR paper, I'll use the DAR paper every time, because our rules using DAR papers are easier to live with than our rules using SAR papers. For one thing, when we now have the 2012 date for SAR papers, okay? So I use the DAR papers, and then I try to find if anybody that's still living in the applicant's lineage. I ask for vital records and marriage records. If they're deceased, I can usually find either not necessarily a death certificate, but I can find a death and burials index, a Social Security application claim index, or a Social Security death index online for that person. Which one of those may not give me all the information I need. So I will look for multiple documents of the same category to try to find the information. But I swap out Ancestry and Family Search all the time. I don't limit my searches to one particular thing. I also use family trees on Ancestry just to find the documents. We all know you cannot use a family tree for the application. But if you have a good researcher on a family tree that's got 20 documents attached to it or more, you can usually in the correct generation find all the documents you need for that generation to document everything: birth, death, marriage, and all. If there's wills or estates, sometimes you can actually pull up a death certificate that is not available anywhere else online because somebody's attached it to their family tree. So I use those a lot, because that way it's just quicker finding the documents than looking for the census records and census documents, wills and estates and those records, marriage records and the marriage records and that type of thing. It's all in one place this way. And then I use, like I said, I go back and forth all the time. Use Fold 3. There are ways to determine they're in Fold 3, and I won't get into so much about this, except for in Fold 3, I learned a long time ago in researching pension records, there's 2 types of pension records. There were the records of the War Department, which is what's basically online, and there's records that the Treasury Department started too. Once pensions started getting paid, then there's Treasury records, and there are ways to determine when you bring up a pension if there are Treasury documents in that pension record before you ever start looking through it. So I do that, and because sometimes you can find a pension record that has information about the widow or surviving children, and sometimes those surviving children, that first generation underneath the patriot is a hard generation sometimes to prove. And I have had pension records which made that easy because it had that information. And it's just a matter of knowing where to look for that information and what's there. Okay. All right. Next question.
Okay. We have Charles Fisher, the proof the Patriot's father lived. well, let's see, I'm trying to say, should I point this out in my application? If you've got an error in the DAR record copy, should you point it out in your application? And I would make a point of saying, here's the proof on our application, the SIR application. And if it's different from the DAR, I would recommend you explain that, at least in a comment.
Right. And we've got some SAR patriots who are red flagged on service. And I have gone back and looked for alternate service and found them several times and reestablished that patriot in SAR. Inslee Anderson from Delaware is an example. He was on a militia fines list, and DAR and SAR accepted applications on him for years. And then they finally figured out that, hey, he's on a fines list. That means he was AWOL. So they disallowed him as a patriot. I called John Sinks and had John send me the Delaware tax list, and he downloaded them on a disk for me and sent them to me. And I found Inslee Anderson on 4 tax lists after the date of the fines list. So we reestablished him as a patriot in SAR, but this time, instead of being on as a militiaman, he was on patriotic service for paying the certain taxes, the supply taxes. So you can do that, but yeah, and it's hard to get DAR to change anything. I have written some letters to DAR in the past when I saw an error in something and trying to point it out. And of course, their system works on, they won't look at anything unless they've got a new applicant applying on that line. Then they'll look at your work, and they just put it on file. And if anybody ever applies there again, they'll look at it. If nobody ever applies, then they don't ever change it.
Okay. I've got a new registrar, state registrar, says, what happens if your applicant doesn't respond to you when you say you've got the application pended? What do you do? What can you do if the applicant doesn't step up and try to get it?
I usually, most of the time, to be honest with you, we don't call the applicant. If it's something I think I can work out, I will. If it's something I need to get with the chapter registrar, we do that. We kind of work backwards down the chain, and I had an applicant, well, that pending application that I mentioned a little while ago that got pending back in February. It got approved last week, I guess it was. I did work with the applicant on that because I actually did the application for him. It was in another chapter, but I think I did the application on him because I knew that we were transitioning with registrars. So I had already become real familiar with the applicant, and we worked together to try to resolve it. If you can't get him to respond to you, if he's not interested in SAR, I don't beat the bushes, grab him by the neck and shake him or anything and say, look, you're coming into SAR whether you like it or not. If he's not interested, he's not interested. And if he's not interested in taking a part in it or doing what he can, then I pretty much drop it at that point, and I would just withdraw the application.
Okay. Terry Briggs brings up made a comment about pending applications will go away at the 3-year point. If it has been on the pending list for 3 years, the policy is as close to the leadership meeting as they can. They will take out all those who are over 3 years. If you want them, somebody from your state society needs to go to the genealogy staff and pick them up. If you
Right.
don't want them, they're going to be shredded and thrown away. So
That's exactly right. And it can extend, I believe, unless they change this, 3 years. But if you let the genealogy staff know that you are actively working on it and it is developing, I think they will actually leave it there as long as 5.
they have to go through the genealogist general, and normally what I'm doing is asking, when do you think you'll get it done? If you
Okay,
need 6 months, let me know. If you need a year, let me know. But let's have a date specific. Let's just not
Yeah.
leave it
Yeah.
open ended.
If you can't get an application either replaced or approved, in 6 months or 7 months or 8 months, certainly within a year, you're probably not going to. It's just going to be one of those that just keeps piling up there for your state. We just don't do that. I've had as many as, I come in and check my email and I get an application pending today, and then I look and dadgum, there's another one tomorrow, and then there's another one 2 days later. I'm thinking, well, what's going on here? Is it pick on Alabama day? But it's really not. It's because we had some things that we needed to fix, for the staff before they felt good about approving the application. So we get right on them. We don't let them sit back. We try to get on them and address the issues and get them where we can get the stuff submitted and approved.
Okay, one more thing on pending applications. Chris Smithson has an SAR application helpers Google group that will give you help, if you will. If you ask the question and there are a bunch of folks on there who say, oh, I live in that area, I can look that up, or whatever the situation may be. So Chris has his email on there. If you look on I think he sent it to everybody. So look up and try that Google group.
Yeah, and probably I need to I'm gonna type my email address on the chat. So if you can look at that, well, that didn't do like I wanted it to.
Okay, while you're typing that, I want to go through, one question was, how do the staff genealogists work? Do they work by society, or do they, well, the system is, we have a drawer or several drawers, but the applications are in a drawer. The staff member goes in and takes the next application that's up off the drawer. So it's not necessarily going to be by society. It could be that they'll take 4 or 5 applications home with them, and they'll take the first 4 or 5 that are in that drawer, and then the next genealogist takes the next group. So there's no specific lineup for state.
All right, I posted my email address in the chat. If anybody needs to email me.
Okay, do we have any other questions or comments? Thank you, Ron, so far for surviving this gauntlet that we threw you in.
Well, I appreciate your patience. I don't know what happened when I got knocked off, but it kind of locked everything up, and I had to get my computer where it was actually loading pages and stuff again and all that. So anyway, we got it finished.
Okay, are there any more questions or concerns for tonight? Any that I missed on the chat?
And Gary, thank you again for asking me to put this together.
You're welcome. I appreciate the help. Okay, I don't see any raised hands. I don't see any visual raised hands. So I'm going to call it a night. I appreciate everybody being here. We'll probably have something later on in June in preparation for the Congress. So have a good night.